We wish to advise that tonight's edition of Australian Story contains images which may disturb some viewers.
I've got an Australian story.
This country is such an inspiration.
Her family's been out here for years.
You know, you'd never see this anywhere else.
I felt I was falling.
It's a secret I've been keeping for my whole life. This reaches to the depths of my soul.
From these wild animals of the bush.
Well, that's my Australian story.
Hello, I'm Caroline Jones. Australia has a proud tradition of wartime news cinematography. We've provided the world with some of the best: Damien Pera, Neil Davis, and the subject of tonight's first story is right up there too. His name is David Brill. With a career spanning 30 years, he's worked with some of the biggest names in Australian television and for all the major international news agencies. David's coverage of world trouble spots is known for its emotional impact, but his professional sensitivity has proved to be a two-edged sword, and he's had to deal with his own demons. This is David Brill's story.
I love having things around me, books and magazines and pictures on the wall. It gives me security, maybe a false security, I don't know. My life's been ups and downs. It feels at times like I've been to a bit of hell and back. I have to really push myself at times, probably maybe trying to prove something to myself or get a bit of respect that I feel I've got to have. The work that I like to do, I call it raw filmmaking. It's the real stuff, filming the real people. So I chose really to go for international news type of work where you're actually there, capturing things as they're really happening.
Are you carefully understand?
The Khmer Rouge.
Uh-huh.
Do you feel nervous of being here?
I hope my pictures can explain and show to people what's going on around the world, that they'll do something about it. It has given me a purpose, and I've tried to get a little sequence every now and then that really penetrates. Like that little girl in Sudan who is hanging on for life.
If the child lived, it was meant to live. As much as I can do, I do. But I think I realise when I can't do something more.
I ran into this Australian nurse. I thought of her like she was the Mother Teresa of the Sudan. So I did this little story on her, this one Australian woman, and we'd just come from the hotel about 10 minutes down the road where we had a buffet lunch, a 5-course lunch, beautifully served there. Then to go up the road and go into this tent and see this child who was dying in front of me of lack of food. I found this incredibly bizarre, strange, and also a bit of guilt.
Everyone who worked with Brillo in the 60s and 70s, Mike Willesee, Jeff McMullen, Paul Lyon and me, everybody, would say he's tough going, but they don't come any better. To be that good, you've got to be a bit mad, a bit manic. All the things that you do put with mad painters or with mad genio. No, I say that affectionately, but he's one of those, you don't go out for a walk in the countryside when you go Brillo filming. You go out for a fairly intense, busy, committed day, and when it's all over, he says, I've got it. He's got it.
I've never felt that I'm good enough, and I don't know where that comes from. It drives me mad. Looking back on my childhood, I think I was very, very sensitive. I'd get hurt very, very easily and very, very shy. I was brought up in Longford, Tasmania, and my parents owned a hotel there called the Blenheim Inn. But it was quite a lonely life. I'm an only child, and my parents were very busy. My father running the bar side of it, my mother running the dining room. Well, most of my meals I had in my room in the hotel, served by a maid in a black frock and a white apron, and a knock on the door, and David, your dinner's here, on a lovely silver tray or whatever, and I'd sit there and have it on the side of my bed. In fact, I quite enjoyed that room. I made it like a study. That was more or less my little cave that I'd go to with all the maps of the world and, you know, very interesting parts like South America. I said, golly, I wonder I'll ever get there one day.
Ransom tackled by like a bid at the 650.
I remember on Saturday nights they had a dinner here every Saturday night called Brill's Grills. Yeah. In the dining room there. My mum used to cook up with the people that worked there. That's right. And then Dad had the band going in here. Yeah. I don't think my mother particularly liked a lot of people who came into the hotel, and she didn't want me to, probably to mix with them with the bar and the drinking and so forth. But the dining room was good. Remember all the old antique chairs? Remember those beautiful chairs and tables in there? That's right. My mother was a stickler for manners. She was a little bit of a snob. She expected a lot from me. She wanted me to be, I think, to be an army officer, to go to Duntroon. When I took an interest in photography, she thought that was a bit beneath me doing that. But when Lord Snowdon, Tony Armstrong-Jones, married Princess Margaret, and he was a photographer, my mother felt much better about me going into photography. In my final year at school, a very well-known Tasmanian photographer, Brian Curtis, came to school to take the photographs. Brian had the biggest commercial studio in Hobart, and I was put on as the trainee. My career wanting to become a David Bailey or a Tony Armstrong-Jones was very, very short, because I joined the ABC.
Within a few hours on the afternoon of Tuesday, February the 7th, the southern districts of Tasmania are turned into scorched battlefields. Nothing can stop the flames.
My first experience of a very big news story was Black Tuesday, the Tasmanian bushfires, in 1967. It was pretty dangerous coming up here that day because all the telegraph poles were on fire and they were falling over the road, and the wires, I didn't know whether they were still alive or not, or whether the electricity had been turned off. So it was pretty hairy.
Well, having got into the hills and spotting ahead of themselves, they developed intensity, and in less than no time there was a real firestorm, and literally millions of sparks fell.
I was pretty young. I felt very guilty and ashamed that here I am with a camera, like on a Sunday picnic. And at one stage I said, blow this, I throw the camera down and I said, can I help? Come on. I'll go in there and drag a bit of furniture out. It was only when that film was set all around the world and people realised what was going on in Tasmania, that a lot of aid came in the sense of money and other things and expertise, I started to realise that, golly, this can be so powerful if it's used the right way. And I think that really set me off on a track of what I wanted to do. After the bushfires, I was transferred to the ABC in Sydney. Then I was lucky enough to go to Four Corners.
I've spent the last 4 weeks in Vietnam with cameraman David Brill and sound recordist Bob Sloss. Here's our report.
It's a sunny day in Saigon. Hope it's good where you are. This is O.C. Smith. Baby, I need your loving.
Baby, I need your love. Vietnam, as one of the highlights of my life, was the most important story going on in the world.
He was the best cameraman of his era. He had a great ability to capture what was happening in one take. You could sneak up behind him while he was filming and saying something's happening, you know, over to your left or behind you, and he would be, you know, holding the camera, and then he'd take one eye off and he'd look around and he'd just wait, and then he'd move, change focus, and in the one shot you had a more compelling story, a take that held longer and told you more.
Mortars and rockets were hitting the perimeter of the airstrip. David Brill kept on filming as babies were pulled into the aircraft by their arms, legs and necks, then literally thrown to me to pass further up the aircraft.
where they had the 3 messes, where they had an officers' mess and the NCOs and...
Down the Mekong?
Yeah.
When they had the poker machines?
Yeah, the poker machines
and
there.
And up on the hill there was a big firefight going on. In those days I worked with Bob Sloss, the sound recordist. He's my nearest thing I've got to a brother, and he's stuck with me through all my ups and downs in life. Selfish and that.
David's a lot more serious now than he was then. We work very hard, but I guess we played pretty hard. At the end of the day, we'd go and have a few drinks and kick on a fair bit.
You really got to be careful.
And even when we were in the bar, we lived and we talked about what we'd done that day and what we were going to do the next day. And I think to David, the job was everything.
I'm not one of those gung-ho people who want to run around with a camera and film guns going off or people shooting each other. But it's what those guns do to people. I think one of the most important sequences that I've ever filmed in my life was of a little girl who got a leg blown off in crossfire. She was coming in to be fitted with an artificial leg. And I thought, what's she done? What's she done? I felt really dreadful. But I knew this is a very powerful, simple little sequence, nothing spectacular. That this is to me, this is really those little moments that you get every now and then. That people watch this.
He was a strange combination of artist and action man. But also I think there was something deep inside him that was seeking excitement, seeking the chase, seeking the adrenaline rush.
One day we're out in a battlefield on the border of Cambodia, Vietnam. We're all waiting till I was ready to film, and we had a slate board like you would in Hollywood, and we said, take one, start the battle. So they started, off they go, and all of a sudden the camera jammed. So I didn't know what to do. I just stopped and I called out, stop the battle, stop. And they all stopped and waited for me in the changing bag in this heat to reload the magazine. And then we started again.
The strange thing about David Brill was that didn't seem unusual to him. It was so important to him to get the pictures that it wouldn't have occurred to him at that time that this is rather unusual to be able to stop a battle. If he couldn't get the pictures, what's the point of having a battle?
I can swear there ain't no heaven, but I pray there ain't no hell.
Well, I've been to a lot of disasters around the world, wars, famines. I've done freelance work, but I've been around pretty well everywhere.
He's been there and done it all. He's somehow survived, battle-scarred and deeply troubled. There's no doubt that seeing all those dead bodies affects you. And at the end of the day, he does get into another world when he presses that button and films, but he goes back to the bar, or he goes back to his hotel room, and it leaves a terrible, dark imprint. And I think he wouldn't be human. I mean, part of his greatness is the fact that he feels.
I was incredibly ambitious for the work, and I think I neglected my family. I just fell in love with the camera probably more than the women the 2 women in my life, my 2 wives. I've even been known to take the camera to my bedroom with me and clean it or something, which is a bit bizarre, a bit silly. I've got a 19-year-old daughter that I don't see a great lot of. She lives in New York. I miss her tremendously. And I look back down where I realise some of the mistakes or the selfishness. I don't know whether some of the things that I've seen have speeded up my drinking. I loved going and having a drink. But even when I was young, I knew that I drank too much. I knew. I didn't just have 1 or 2, I wanted 4 or 5, 6 or 7, and it made me feel very good. But after a while, it started to catch up with me as the years went on. And I think it used to kill a lot of the pain, the personal pain, the oversensitivity. So I began to use it as a crutch. gave me false confidence. I wish I could drink, maybe like a normal person, a social drinker. I've tried to have one or two and it doesn't work that way. It's been dreadful, the loneliness, locking myself away in my room so no one would see me. I didn't want my friends to see me because I felt so ashamed, so guilty. But I still would drink. At times I'd go without it for a year or two. Then I'd say, well, I might just try to have one or two, and that would lead back into the whole pattern again. Quite a few years ago when I was based in New York, I went to the Betty Ford Centre for a month. But after a while, I drifted back in. I thought I could have one or two drinks. I'm sure it's affected my career. I know it has. You become unreliable, in my case, and people only take so much. They might love you dearly, and I hope that I've killed it this time, but one never knows, and only can keep on trying. Because I'm sure that I could have achieved a lot more if it wasn't for that problem of alcohol.
God love you, David.
Major?
Hi, Major.
Lovely to see you.
Will you look after me if I might, sir?
Indeed, indeed. I'll hold your hand.
I'll stand beside you. Kingsley told me to stand beside you.
It's very difficult. You put one foot in front of the other, and off you go, and eventually you get somewhere.
Good on you.
It's really nice.
I don't know whether I've been embittered by my experiences, but I do get frustrated. I think there's something right now like maybe 100 different wars going on around the world. So nothing really changes. For some reason, we don't learn. We haven't learnt. And I just don't know why. With the intelligence that we're supposedly to have, we still are going to war. Overall, I don't think cameramen, the sound recorders, get the credit they should get, particularly in places like wars or famines.
I remember once going to Anzac Day in Somalia, and that was an amazing experience to see the Australians side by side with the Turks.
David Brill represents the cameraman's lament in television. I think rightly he felt he should be recognised. But it's a fairly thankless task. At the end of the day, it's going to be some reporter's mug up there who gets the glory and gets up and collects the awards. And meanwhile, still dodging bullets is the cameraman, and that was Brillo.
The plane load of almost 300 refugees has flown out with assurances it's safe to go home.
The long journey home to Kosovo began in buses.
I've just turned 55, and I don't know what the future holds. I still love my work very much. I've had a bit of time away from it deliberately. I think I was drained out by it. When I watch the news and current affairs programs in the evenings and see the stuff going on in the former Yugoslavia and Timor, I would really just love to be there.
Individual circumstances that
people have said to me, David, one day you're going to run out of time, you're going to get killed, or you're going to walk on a landmine or something. But I've always, no, I'll go, and I still want to go.
Yeah, I'm so happy because we go now in freedom there. I think it's the war is finished.
Hi, I'm Roy Higgins. You may remember me, I won a Melbourne Cup back there in the mid-60s. The next Australian story is about a very good friend of mine from a country town called Deniliquin up in New South Wales, where I come from. His name is Tommy Loy, and certainly there were no better horsemen around in his time. This is Tom's story.
Not many cars in those days, and if a car come down our road, it was either the police or the welfare.
Why don't you just put it this way? Please.
The welfare came down and they were going to take me away and put me in a home. Because I wasn't going to school, they were after me. But I did have a fear of them. I did have a fear of them.
What that was that.
If they'd have come looking for me in the scrub, they would never had a hope of finding me, because the blackfellas had told me how to lose people and how to dodge, and they were on my side anyway, so if they could have stalled them, they would have.
Seen young Tom Loy? Know where he is?
No.
Anywhere?
Yes, mate.
Nobody seen young Tom Loy? Can't tell me where he is?
No.
This area is called the Flat. Aborigines were looked on as a downcast, and because we lived with them, we were looked on as downcast as well. My name's Tom Loy, and I was born here in Deniliquin in 1930, and I'm just on 70. That's a witchy grub. Put him on a bit of hot tin, roll him round, goes very crisp, and he's very sweet to eat. It's a survival thing for in the bush. If you're out of tucker, you can find them underneath the bark. My father unfortunately had polio, and when I was 8 years old, a terrible tragedy struck our family because my father had a fall in the hospital. He broke his kneecap and would never walk again. It sort of devastated us because we'd loved him dearly, and I volunteered to be the breadwinner. Yeah, it was very hard.
Tom was very thin and very wiry, but he used to work like an adult. There was nothing he wouldn't do, and always everything seemed to go back to Tom.
Rabbit trapping saved our lives because I used to set 140 rabbit traps a day. Lots of the times I couldn't pull the peg out, so we'd have to drive up alongside of it and wrap it around it and drive forward and lever it out. Yeah. Dad used to recite Banjo Patterson. After listening to him so many times, I decided I wanted to be the best horseman in the world. #1 in everything that I'd done, and I never ever sort of wavered from it. Then I went to Melbourne to be a jockey, and I could have probably made it as a jockey, but my parents were so poor, and the wages that I got was so little. I used to have to come home every 6 months and go rabbiting and earn enough money to get going again. So against my father's wishes, I started as a buck jump rider, and I won 14 championships straight, including the Australian International.
The International Rodeo and Stampede, part of Melbourne's Moomba Festival, gets away to a high-kicking start at Flemington Showgrounds.
I was up against the Americans and all the best riders in Australia. As I got on the horse, I was really fired up. And the horse came out and it did buck very hard, and I top scored on it. To me, it was a triumph for my family because I didn't get a lot of pleasure. I'd done it because people had laughed at me. I just wanted to make a name for my family, my father. And it's an amazing thing with a sport. You can be black, you can be any colour, but if you're a champion sportsman, everybody wants to know you. But I walked away from it. I had a terrible thing done to me, and it was a cheat, and I said, if that's the way you run your rodeos, I don't want to be part of it. So I chucked my chaps on the ground and said, I'll never ever ride again. I was very fortunate. I took up show jumping, which pleased my father because he didn't like the rodeo people. And within 4 years, I represented Australia, and I won every major show jumping event in the country. I had a horse called Prince, who was a part thoroughbred and part Clydesdale. He was just the most wonderful horse in the world. He never ever let me down. Every time I asked him, he gave to me. And we became a combination that was feared by everybody.
I just heard a little bit about Tom Loy, but nothing else. Yeah. He was talking away, and I just knew I was a buck jump rider. That's about all.
My wife was the captain of the Australian ladies cricket team. She was opening bat for Australia. She was a selector for Australia. She was captain of New South Wales and opening bat for New South Wales. And I was a horsebreaker. I was a nobody. I lived with the black people. Mary was in a position she could have married anyone in the world. We had lots of troubles. And I went with Mary for 10 years before I married her.
And I think it was just a combined interest in horses and helping people. We always seem to have a lot of children here.
The riding school for 32 years has been an amazing thing. There is now children, second-generation children, coming through the school from their parents have been through it in years gone by.
Gary was the mother and he looked after Kim, and I used to often be out riding and he'd be looking after him. He's only a little fella and he was just wonderful. You couldn't get two better children in the world, really. She's won quite a few big events. Kim, she's done quite well.
It was just that a lot of people used to say to me that I was a terribly lucky person, and I thought I'd write it and just say to let them know that luck never come easy. Children can be very cruel at school. We could never say that we lived with the blacks or the Aborigines. We just lived down by the river. My time on the flat with the Aboriginal people, that taught us to survive on very little. I look back on it now as it was a wonderful experience, really, and I feel very privileged that I've learnt these things because my bush skills have learnt me to survive, that you never give up. You have lots of setbacks and you've got to climb over them. All of you that's here today have played in some way to help me get the strength to keep going. My father always said to me, he said, never really want to worry about where you come from. He said, it's where you end up in life that's important. 2 years ago, I had a massive heart attack. And I had some bad news the other day. I was diagnosed with second-degree cancer, and the doctor said to me that I could have 3 months to live. And I've jumped a lot of hurdles in my time, and some of them have been fairly stiff and fairly high, but I've always managed to get over them, and I'll get over this one. I'm mighty proud of what I am.
In a moment, we'll look at Australian Story for next week. Sunday night, come behind the camera of the world's most recognised director.